I know how scary it can be when you have an idea and you want to show it to people, but the fear that they will either not like it or worse, that they'll steal it. Well, at some point in the business of inventing, patenting, and licensing it, you're going to have to show your product to other people. And one of those times is when you're trying to get a quote or the cost of goods on your product. So stick around so that you can learn some ways to limit your exposure while getting the quotes that you need to ultimately show the cost of goods to your prospective licensees. Hi, Lisa Lloyd here with more tips, tricks, and strategies to help you accelerate and optimize your invention licensing business success. If you like what you learn here today, please hit the like and subscribe button. It's a free way to support me doing this. And if you hit the notification bell, you'll be the first to know whenever I've posted a new video each and every week. Even if you have a quote on what it will cost to make your product, a licensee or a prospective licensee in this case would still need to go out and get a formal quote from their factory. But in order for them to make a good business decision about whether or not to continue discussing the idea with you, they will need to know some basic things right up front. And that's why we do something called sell sheets. I recently did a video on this, and you can learn more about that here, or I'll leave a link in the description below. I think that most people get hung up thinking that it needs to be the exact cost of goods, and that's why they leave it off their sell sheet. But here's what's important for you to understand. When you're talking to a company about licensing, the initial tool that you use, that sell sheet, is what you're guiding your conversation with, so that when you speak with them about it, you're addressing all of the most important features and benefits and basically bringing them up to speed on what work you've done on that invention up to date, so that they can make an intelligent business decision about whether or not this could be a fit. Not that it will be, but that it could be a fit. They will take that sell sheet back to their team internally and they'll discuss it. And of course, as part of their decision-making process, cost of goods is going to be a factor. So if they feel like they don't have a good enough quote from you, they can go to their factories and they can either get an informal or a more formal quote to further define that. But having a general idea that's close enough and is in their wheelhouse is going to be enough to help influence the decision to bring that sell sheet back to the team and at least keep the conversation going. Now, is not having cost of goods on your sell sheet a deal breaker? Absolutely not, especially if it's obvious to the company what it would cost. But if you do know and you've done your research, your due diligence in the early days, making sure that you are truly inventing a solution that is not only commercially viable, but is manufacturable at a price that yields a good enough profit margin for a company to be in the business of, then it just makes sense to add it here later when you're having the conversation. Initially, this can be done with a simple estimate. It doesn't need to be a formal quote. And including that estimate on your sell sheet will give them the general idea of whether or not it fits within the range that they're looking for. But before I dive into how to get a quote, let's just talk quickly about the legal protection or the legal ramifications around doing this. Now, there's no guarantee if you do this. Obviously, there are bad people out there, but I think that I can show you some ways to mitigate that today. Now, you can wait to get a quote from manufacturers until after your patent pending, and that certainly will insulate you a little bit. But the problem is, what if you file a patent on something that you are not sure about the cost to manufacture and get all the way down that path and start talking to companies only to find out that the cost of goods is exorbitant? There's just not enough margin in there for them. Then you've wasted all of that time and money on something that is frankly never going to get licensed. So unless you're confident that it's absolutely going to be made at a cost that would allow it to be sold at a competitive price, I would encourage you to go ahead and get a quote before you invest the money in a patent. And whether you're patent pending or not, you can always ask a factory to sign an NDA, which is a non-disclosure agreement. And keep in mind, when you're sourcing overseas, an NDA is likely not going to be legally binding for you. So let me show you some clever tricks to get around that. Now, one of the easiest ways, if you're working with an engineer who's helped you make and model or prototype your invention, then just asking your engineer what they estimate the cost to make that product would be. Generally speaking, they're going to have enough, and that number will be good enough to add to your sell sheet or to include in your conversation with your companies when you start pitching for license. But if you have Frankenstein, as we've talked about in other videos, your own model, you've put something together, or maybe you just have a virtual prototype and you haven't actually physically built anything, and you're stuck and you don't know who to ask because you didn't use an engineer, you're going to have to get a quote. Now, if you're going to make and sell your product yourself, then you're probably going to want to get 5 to 15 even quotes to make sure you're getting the best possible price. But of course, then we're talking about formal quotes again. So for the purpose of licensing, you really only need to get 1, maybe 2, just if you're not really sure about the first one, so that you have, again, a guesstimate or a general idea of what the cost might be to make your product. You could start by estimating the cost of goods just from looking at other similar products and going to something like Alibaba.com to give you a general idea of what buying it in bulk or at a huge volume from a factory would cost. Let me show you how that would work. For example, let's say that you have an idea for a new type of hanger that has additional functionality with a few more plastic rows, and it would be a plastic hanger. Then you can come here to Alibaba and you can simply put in plastic hangers. And the reason you want to put specifically the material is because if you don't, you run the risk of getting a material that won't cost even close to the same amount. The result here is a long, very, very long list of hangers filled with all different kinds. Yes, it's not just plastic, but it does show you plastic hangers. Now I'm going to compare, let's just say it's to this, 12 cents for about 1,000 pieces here. These are plastic, 12 cents again. I'm seeing a trend here, right? 10 cents, but these are a little bit more round, less flat. So 10, 12 cents. Now if I'm going to add just a couple of rows or some additional plastic to this, whatever design features that you've created that make it novel, then I can safely assume it's not going to be more than twice this cost, right? So let's say it's going to be maybe 15 to 20 cents per piece in this quantity, just to give you an idea. Now, there are additional costs associated with manufacturing, like tooling up, but that's not the point here. We just want an estimated or guesstimated cost of goods to let the prospective licensee know so that they can make an intelligent business decision about whether or not to take this back to their people and continue to review further. So in this case, I would say 15 to 20 cents. And while you're here, if you would like to get a more formal quote for any reason, then you could reach out to these companies, contact the suppliers, give them the information that they need to give you a more formal quote. And depending on how concerned you are, you could even try breaking it up into 2 or more parts and getting quotes from multiple factories so that none of them knows how it all comes together. I find that just looking at a lot of similar products and then guesstimating is plenty of information for me to assume from and then ultimately share that information with the prospective licensee. And there's never been a question about whether or not it was exactly right, just as long as it was in range to get me through that first call and ultimately into a conversation about negotiating if they are interested in the product. Now, if for some reason that won't work for you and you can find factories domestically or even better in your own backyard, getting a quote personally from a local manufacturer is another great way to get a general idea. But here's what I want you to understand. This is what they do for a living, and a formal quote does take time. They have to count out materials. They need to know all of the details that you probably don't even have about your invention in order to give you a formal quote. So what I would recommend, especially if you can walk in face to face, is show them the concept that you're working with. Of course, have them sign the NDA, but show them what you generally are thinking about and say, look, I'm just looking for a spitball number. If you could estimate what you think based on your experience, that's all I need. I'm not going to hold you to it, so don't worry about it. I just want the general idea of what it will cost. Remember, if you leave any question unanswered in their mind, any gaps in their thinking, it's easier for them to just say no and turn you away than it is for them to take on the work of bringing it in. And if you really want to get a company excited about it, then be prepared to at least have a conversation. So here's my last little tip for you today. If you have not gotten the cost of goods, you're not comfortable getting it for any reason, and you're already in the process of talking to companies, and they do ask, and they most likely will ask, you what it's going to cost to make, my advice to you would be to say back to them, I'm not sure. I've asked around and haven't really been able to get a direct answer. Is that important to you? Because if it is, I will go get the answer and we can meet or talk again next week. That way you're learning from them just how important that answer is. If that's the one decision factor that's holding you back from getting to the next level, which is bringing that sell sheet back to the team to evaluate further. Make no mistake of it, cost of goods is an important part of their decision, and anything that you can do to make that decision for them easier is going to put you on the path to success. I hope you found this helpful today. Please remember to hit the like and subscribe button if you liked what you heard today, and the notification bell if you want to be notified each time I post a new video. Until then, happy inventing and dare to dream and imagine what's possible when powered by innovation. Generally look at it and give you an idea of what they think it might cost.